welcome to this interview. Thank you so much, Lorna Gabriel, for coming on with us today. We have her. She's coming from Tucson, Arizona. She is the founder of Luxe Godhead, the author of The Dark Secret, and a metaphysician extraordinaire. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Lorna.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. Yeah, we were having an amazing conversation the other day, and we knew that when we connected, it was going to be really, really awesome. Awesome. Yep. So let's jump right into it. So let's have you tell our audience about the work you do and how you are using your work to create heaven on earth. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing. Yeah.
That is, where do I begin? Well, I think I have a few definitions of heaven on earth. There's kind of a practical definition, which is that you're thriving. Mm-hmm. And experiencing magic and miracles and in your genius zone, your zone of genius. Mm-hmm. And so that's really, that's all the work that I do. I help people discover and monetize their genius, their spiritual genius.
Yeah.
And also working with other companies where they wouldn't really necessarily call it their spiritual genius. They'd call it their genius. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to have a consciousness that is masterful and is not constantly being weighed down by what I call shadow. A lot of people call shadow. Because streaming your genius and living in that space it puts you through the greatest trials, that you can imagine. And so the other part of the work that I do is called shadow alchemy. And it's a methodology or a modality that I invented to fix myself first. Mm-hmm. Because I'm diagnosed with a whole cocktail of, as they would say, mental illnesses. So I have bipolar, PTSD, severe mood and anxiety disorder, and 2 types of ADD.
Wow.
And I went through a dark night of the soul, and I was diagnosed with those and had a nervous breakdown and became suicidal and, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And was told I needed to go on 2 forms of medication just to stabilize. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I'm not doing that, because this is not what this is about. This is a spiritual breakthrough that's waiting to happen that I keep aborting. And that's why my life isn't working. But I also was unstable, and I needed to find my own source of power. And so I work with the kind of 4 main archetypes. Everyone's familiar with them: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. But I developed a modality that really reprogrammed my psyche, and my symptoms left. Although I got to keep all of the strange blessings of being a neurodivergent brain. Mm-hmm. My psychic gifts turned way, way up. I made $1 million in a year in my business. It's really kind of the fountain of youth, if you will, for consciousness, or the holy grail of consciousness. So I also teach that to my clients, because without the genius piece, you really don't feel fulfilled and as if you're doing, the work you're meant to do here. And without the shadow alchemy, you can't do that work. So those go hand in hand in creating, what you call heaven on earth in individual beings. The greater heaven on earth that is coming, that I talk about, which is, gets into very esoteric kind of language and stuff, sure. But it's the waking dream reality that is coming. And it's essentially the collapsing of the quantum and the 3D realities into one impossible, because how can they coexist? But one impossible paradoxical reality, which is going to be heaven on earth for some people and hell on earth for others.
Can you elaborate a little more on what you mean by that? Like, why would it be hell on earth when it seems like it would be such an amazing unfolding of this miracle Like, don't you think that at some point, because I agree with you, but I want to know what you think as to why it would be so harmful to some people or challenging for some people while so blissful for others.
Yeah. Well, because realities are going to start splitting. We're going to start inhabiting, I mean, literally our own reality. I mean, when you step into, expanded and extremely advanced capabilities of essentially placing your hands on the source codes of the universe, the outcome of that, depending on your own state of being, can be hell or heaven. And the waking dream itself, I mean, think about LSD, right? I don't know if you've ever taken, any of that stuff, but the trip can either be magical or it can be hell, right? And that's what I'm talking about, that there's going to be a collapse of collective reality. So right now we live and we're powered by what I call the light grid. I think a lot of people use that term, but it's collective consciousness, and it is the source of all of our energy and power and consciousness now. But it's dying because it's done its job. And there's a new grid that's being built, which is called the black light grid. And that's what's going to run the waking dream. And it does not, there's no collective reality anymore. And so people are kind of left kind of to their own devices. And those devices, and there's no, like right now, there's kind of a ceiling and a floor on where our individual consciousnesses can go and how far afield and how far astray they can go and how much power they can have over reality. We don't know a whole lot of people who can pull an apple out of the sky or what have you, or fly or do other things that I might not consider desirable to witness or to be a part of. But so right now we have a lot of like strictures and rules and spiritual rules and regulations in place about how matter and energy can interact with each other. And that's kind of because we're like in kindergarten with respect to energy mastery and how to use it. But we're going to be in PhD land. And some people are not going to be able to handle kind of the conscious, they're not going to be able to handle the strain on their consciousness that brings. So what we see now is just going to expand in both directions, is really what I'm saying. So the people that are, and we're seeing it happen.
Yes, we are.
People that are using the past 18 months to blow shit up. I mean, I had my best year in my business.
Yeah.
This past year and a half. Biggest months by far. There are people who are not experiencing any kind of downturn from this or anything like that. And then, of course, there's other people who are suffering terribly. This
absolutely
is absolute hell for them. So all I'm saying is that those two poles are going to, speed in the opposite direction as this waking dream comes online. And so, and that's, I don't know if that explains, I don't know if that's answers your question.
I totally understand it. Yeah. What I'm observing a lot is that people are still stuck in a state of fear, and they keep going into this almost sort of like collapsing into this false artificial reality. Well, sorry, 1 second. Okay, let me cut that. So what I feel is that what's going on is that there is a collapsing of a reality for them that are living in fear, to where they're kind of getting stuck in this matrix bubble, and it's very physical, it's very fear-based, it's very, I almost kind of feel it when I talk to people. Like when you talk to people, you're like, it's almost as if there's like a shield in front of that person.
Absolutely.
and they're not able to approach.
Yeah.
While when I meet some other people, I feel like their heart space is open and I can be able to interact with them. And it seems like their life is flowing a lot easier, and that they're sort of watching this reality get built. And they're kind of like, this is so interesting that people are falling into this reality and getting sucked into this vortex. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to be part of this. Right. So I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So it's very interesting that you talk about this concept of a dark grid. Can you elaborate in your experience how the dark grid is different from the light grid?
Yeah.
And how that functions on a 3-dimensional reality. Is it more that that there's almost immediate karmic consequences? Like what you'll do, it'll happen like almost instantaneously, and you can't really escape what's going to happen. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Actually, no.
Okay.
So the light grid, is, as I said just a minute ago, it is what currently powers 3D reality, right? Our bodies have light bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Our physical bodies receive all of their energy and power from our light bodies, and our light bodies are connected to this common source of energy and power called the light grid, right? Mm-hmm. The dark grid, or it's not really even a grid. It's like a lattice or something. It's kind of an undulating kind of lattice thing. But the fundamental difference between the light grid and the dark grid is the light grid is built on relation. So in the I use this analogy a lot in the book of John, the Gospel of John. The very first sentence in Greek is NRK ho logos, and logos meaning word. That's how it's translated a lot in the Bible. But really, logos means logic, ratio, relationality. And that's what our 3D world is based on. Everything is related to, so on the grid, everything is related to everything else in a set relationship. And that's where we get things like karma. It's where we get the spiritual laws that govern all of us. We're all kind of children of the light grid, right? Which is why our
sort of like cause and effect in a way.
Cause and effect.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Spiritual law, right? Karma, like exactly what you were talking about. Right? It might not come now, but it's going to come because there is, the what is it? The second law of thermodynamics, right? Every action
has an equal and opposite
reaction, right? I mean, you can't even imagine functioning any other way. Mm-hmm. But that is. Anyway, and even things like practical things like our legal system is built on this concept. The dark is bringing the ear ratio. So there is not, and the dark is the harbinger, or the almost the John the Baptist, if you will, of the black light grid. So and it's kind of coming to prepare consciousness for this radical, biggest new leap we've ever made, that really we've been preparing for millennia. There is no all the laws that you can imagine being governed by the light grid don't apply in the dark. So, which is why I say it's built on the ear ratio. So, cause and effect is not. It's much more difficult to understand how to operate in the dark grid, which is why it's been challenging for me to run a business, what I call a dark business, because it operates according to totally different laws. It's chaotic, and because it is birthing the new. what it is birthing is so radically new that we often find ourselves trying to apply light grid spiritual concepts to the dark and navigate that way. And it doesn't work at all. So everything is kind of backwards. You back into an understanding of these spiritual laws, and then they change. They're constantly changing. I say chaos is disorder of a higher order. And the dark is the newest, lightest light that has not yet come into collective consciousness. It has not yet been recognized and integrated into collective consciousness. So while it is the newest, lightest light, it looks dark to all of us, people who have been raised on the light grid.
Sure. So I want to have like a little bit of a differentiation, because I think a lot of people associate like evil with darkness.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, and I think that's probably what you're saying with like a light grid concept, right?
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
can you sort of define a little more about how this, how do I articulate this? So
language fails when you're trying to.
Yeah. So why do you think does it like feel like darkness? Does it feel like disorder? Does it look like darkness? Or okay.
Yeah, it's one of the it's one of the most it is the most confounding kind of next space in consciousness. We've the light grid is if you think about it in terms of geography, right? The light grid is populated, man. We know every crevice and corner of the light grid. The dark is the new frontier. Dark consciousness is the new frontier of consciousness. And as any pioneer knows, this is why we have the phrase "here be dragons." So that came from a very particular globe called the Hunt-Lennox globe that was built in 1510, I believe. And the map makers scrawled across a big swath of Southeast Asia, "Hic sunt dracones," like "here be dragons," because it was the unexplored territory. It was the piece of the globe that they had not explored, and so and that is that the use of the word dragon there is fascinating to me, because one of the other you could almost interchange dark consciousness with dragon consciousness, kind of.
Okay.
And so it is an overturning of everything that we know to be true and reliable as spiritual law. And because it is the utter unknown and the absolute new, and because it is the erasio, it does not exist. It's like dark energy and dark matter, right? It does not exist in relation to the light. It cannot be known by the light. It cannot be detected by the light. And so from the perspective of the light, I mean, if you're looking into the unknown, and you can't make sense of it with any of the tools that you have at your disposal, the safe bet is to say that the unknown is terrifying. It is terrifying, but that it's evil, that it's sinister. Stay away. Hic sunt dracones, right? And it could be because what I have seen a lot of people in the light worker spirituality world do is mistake shadow for darkness. Okay. So shadow is also, it's not undetected. Shadow is just distorted light, right? Light is its natural state. So it can be detected by the light, but deep shadow looks like pure darkness, right?
Sure.
And so what a lot of people do is mistake one for the other. And the darker you go into shadow, the more quote unquote evil you become, right? That's I don't really believe in the word evil, but that's what people are referring to when they use that word. They're referring to the deepest, darkest shadow consciousness that has really just overtaken somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the dark codes, which are actually the genius codes, they reside at the heart of the deepest, darkest shadow. They're not in relation to it. There's actually a void or a gap that you have to leap kind of over in terms of consciousness to go from shadow to dark. But you don't reach the dark through the light. You reach it through the shadow. And so it can look terrifying to people, and and a lot of people who come across this work run the other direction, you know, because it's the unknown, and it's not just the unknown. It requires radical what is the word? I'm going to use a phrase that it doesn't really do it, but radical self-trust. You know, there's a country western song that I've been listening to, which kind of relates to this. If you're going through hell, keep on going. Don't slow down. If you're scared, don't show it. You might get out before the devil even knows you're there. And that is it, because it is a total dismantling of your consciousness and your psyche. It brings death, and it brings chaos. But it doesn't bring death in the service of mayhem, which is totally different than chaos. Mayhem is just pure disorder. Chaos is disorder of a higher order, just like dark is the newest, lightest light. There's something it's bringing through that is in greatest service of what we're here for. But we can't actually really absolutely know that until we're on the other side of it.
Okay.
So
I think I'm starting to grasp this a little bit. So, so when you first started to uncover this new understanding of reality, of where we're going to, did that manifest in your own physical reality, like absolute chaos, like homelessness or fear or self-destruction? And at what point did you actually start to see, wow, there's something more magical that I'm coming into, and that transformed this crazy chaos into your life into, you know, you said making $1 million a year and thriving and teaching people these things. So what was it that you experienced, or what
it was actually
experience, and then get into that?
Yeah. Well, it's actually the opposite, right? Because everything is the opposite in the dark. So, you know, in the light, you shine a light down your path, right? And you might not be able to shine it all the way to the end. Okay. But you can shine a light down your path. You can, you know, even if it's a candle, right? And so you can see where you're going. And there's kind of the decisions that you make are in response to where you think those decisions will take you, because that's where you want to go, right? I mean, this is like kind of obvious. Yeah. That's not the way it works in the dark. You make decisions that make absolutely no sense. That seem in fact just either senseless, or even destructive. Sure. And that happens for quite a while. And the decisions, so in terms of running my business or just living my life, it's only much later that I see, if I look back, because you cannot look forward. There's no you're blind in the dark. You're not navigating by sight anymore. You're navigating by taste, actually. But if I look behind me, this is what I mean about chaos as disorder of a higher order. everything that felt so chaotic and completely disconnected, and decisions I was making that had nothing to do with each other and seemed really crazy and irresponsible, and I didn't understand why I was doing this, were sometimes backwards. Like I would make a decision that didn't need to be made yet, and then I would make another decision that normally in a business you would make first, and then you make the next one that builds on that, and the next one that builds on that. But when I looked behind me at those decisions, the purpose of each of them was it took my breath away. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but the point is that I didn't have any evidence. I didn't have any evidence to guide me. I had to, one of probably my strongest clairs is claircognizance, which is also, I think, it's one of the most challenging because there's no evidence. It's just, I just know this.
Sure.
I just know that this is something new that I'm navigating. It makes no fucking sense. I have no compass, but I just know, and I have to know while everyone else thinks I'm totally fucking crazy, and me included.
So it's like an inner knowing. It's like I think I can equate like a similar thing to, and maybe you can kind of say if I'm on the money or not. So I was kind of tapping in and like, what do I do now? Like I always kind of call out. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And then at one point it said, eat a banana. I'm like, that's absurd. Like, I don't need to eat a banana. I need to do this. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to eat a banana. It was like, eat a banana. I'm like, fine, I'll eat a banana. So I went in and I ate a banana. And then I realized that my stomach was starting to hurt because I had taken some supplements like 45 minutes before, and I didn't have enough food in my system. And if I was feeling sick, I would have had to sleep, and I would have missed an important date for like a call or something. And so something that had seemed nonsensical made sense only in the future. Yeah. So is that sort of something similar to what you're talking about?
Kind of. It's very difficult to talk about. I mean, it really is. I that's why I wrote a book, because I was like, I don't know if I could write it, but I have a hard time talking it.
Sure.
Yes. That's your intuition, right? That's intuition. And that comes from your kind of super conscious connection to your body that bypasses your conscious mind. Right. And so tapping into your intuition, that is a navigational tool that unfortunately a lot of people don't use. But that's not quite what I'm talking about. But I don't know if it's going to help to split hairs, because my intuition really, your intuition leaves, because intuition is built within your body, and your body is light, right? Your body's connected to the light grid. Intuition is one of the most powerful navigational tools on the light grid. In the dark, you don't even have intuition. In fact, you're going against your intuition a lot of the time.
Okay.
Because there is a new way that you're meant to be guided through this kind of, space. And I mentioned taste earlier. It's really taste.
Could you describe what you mean by that? So you like taste something, or like?
No. I mean energetic taste.
Okay.
So the difference, one of the key differences, is a collapsing of the moral code, which is why people are so, one of the reasons when I talk about this, people are like, oh my God, this stuff's sinister and evil. I need to run. If you think about it, what you have a taste for is not always, at least on the light grid, not always what one should be following.
Sure.
because we have a taste for all kinds of things that are not necessarily beneficial. Intuition is a 100% trustworthy guidance system. As long as it is your intuition, which a lot of people don't know how to hear it and how it speaks. Every single time that you follow your intuition, you're guaranteed an upgrade, success. I mean, you're never going to follow your intuition accurately and be led into some kind of low frequency experience. It's just not, it's not ever going to happen. Sure. But taste is a crapshoot, right? I mean, I might have a taste for something that turns out to be poisonous. And I won't know until it's kind of too late. Yeah. In the dark, you have to navigate. This is probably the best way to say it. You have to navigate by a tool you are not 100% will lead you in your highest and best direction. It will, but because we have spent so much time questioning our taste. I mean, think about Eve, right? That was a taste-based fall from grace, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then think about, the poison apple in Snow White.
Sure.
So we have this, we have this a deep-seated fear of our taste that is kind of hidden in a lot of different myths and fairy tales and spiritual.
Sure. Yeah, it's like it tastes sweet, but it's actually poisonous and stuff like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And poison, one of the things that I say is that poison is a potion. It's only poison if this isn't talking about genius. Genius is a poison if it is left in the system, in its host system, because it's meant to flow through and out into the world. It is a potion if it is allowed to stream through you. So it's similar. That's a similar kind of way of navigating in the dark. You have to navigate by taste. You have to get intimate, because taste is the only truly intimate and potentially dangerous sense, if you really think about it. Sight, you can be distant from that which you're engaging with. Touch, you do have to be intimate, but accepting something into the inside of you, right? It could potentially kill you. It is a completely different thing, and it's blind. It's blind tasting, right? You can't even see what you're tasting. Yeah. And so there's a strange and beautiful and terrifying relationship to the dark that takes mastery to navigate. And yet it produces euphoria. That is that when you master it and can work with these principles, there's not, it's like discovering paradise. Getting there is hell, but it's really worth it. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Sure. Yeah. So I just kind of want to summarize and then see if I'm on the same page, and then we can move on. Yeah. So what I'm sensing is that this genius that you're talking about is in this dark light realm, and that one needs to enter through a passage to get to this dark light realm by what seems like a nonsensical kind of path. But once you do come into this state of genius, that's where the real magic happens. Is that what I'm sensing so far?
Yes.
Okay.
So magic happens, and it's still disorienting. You never get comfortable in the dark. It's still always disorienting, but absolutely magical. I mean, that's why I use the word euphoria, because that's that's the experience. Yeah.
Well, in a way, what I sense is that when people become too complacent in their lives, and they're too easy, they're not really being pushed, and they don't really have a sense of like going out and breaking through and overcoming. But if you are in a state of just slight discomfort, it's going to push somebody to move, to operate, and just to keep going and to keep persisting and to keep going until you break through. Is that sort of what you're talking about? Like, because
you mean the state of being in the dark? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, in a way, because I can only speak from my own personal experience. Like if I sort of have an idea as to where I want to go, but I don't know if it's going to be this direction or that. And I just am embracing the feeling uncomfortable, and I'm still taking the next step that I think I need to do, but it might not make sense. And that's when it really breaks through. Is that sort of what you're talking about a little bit?
That actually is, so remember I was talking about the 4 archetypes.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the magician.
Okay.
What you just described is 100% magician.
Okay.
And that's what the shadow alchemy helps people step into. It helps them step into those supreme, masterful light archetypes. And out of the shadow version. So the shadow version of magician is saboteur. And the saboteur is like, I can't make a move or make a decision unless I know all the information. I know exactly how it's going to turn out, and I've got my plan. And then I have also my backup plan. I mean, that's the saboteur, right?
Sure.
The magician works on intuition and is master of time. And so is in flow with time and doesn't need to see the way and doesn't need to have it all explained. Those are because it sees through illusion. The magician sees through the illusion of the shadow, that's trying to impose its reality on consciousness. This is different than that. There's actually dark archetypes that allow us to navigate the dark, and it's really more about, I call it the negative frame. What you're talking about is kind of the positive frame. So it's about having content and matter and resources available, and then discerning and kind of sifting and sorting through all of these, like what is really going to serve me and where am I really called, what am I really called to use and where am I really called to move? That's all dealing with matter and content. The dark archetype that the magician and the warrior actually kind of elevate into is called the activator, and that is the negative frame. And what you're doing is keeping content and matter at bay until there is a moment when something drops in, and that's the decision that you make. So it's revert again. It's reversed from the way that we operate according to intuition, and the only way that I can describe it is it's like being in a gyroscope or something. Where you've seen those gyroscopes that just because of the weight, that the ball or whatever kind of moves, all the different other spheres move one way and then the other way. And it's kind of this chaotic, but not chaotic kind of movement. That's how it feels to live in the dark. Everything is up in the air all the time. And that's actually why I talk about quantum flight. There is a sense of flying blind, and and that's the thing. You're always flying blind. You don't get to see. You only get to see when it's no longer necessary to see, because all you can see is behind you, where you've already been. So I don't know if that helps, but there's a constant devotion to the state of disorientation. And the reason for that, actually, I just realized the reason for that is because consciousness and the psyche right now are formed and governed by order. It's the same thing as the ratio, right? The light grid being built on these one-to-one relationships, because that's what 3D reality requires. You have to have order for things to cohere, right? For space and time to stay in kind of a linear functioning way for all of us here on Earth. But what is coming, which is the waking dream, is a world where, I mean, it's the dream world, right? Like you can fly in your dream. You can jump from, reality to reality in an instant. You can shapeshift, right? There's no underlying substrate of ordering matter that happens in the dream space. And that's going to happen here in our physical reality. And if that is to be the case, then the mind and consciousness and the psyche have to be extremely capable of being in a constant state of kind of disorientation, so that they can so that our consciousnesses can allow this radical new way of operating in the quantum and really inviting the quantum world into the 3D world to disrupt and disorient it into this magical state. But our minds keep wanting to place order and place order and place order and find regularity and find rhythm and predictability.
I find myself doing that when I'm like talking to you. And
yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's
you're like, is it like this? And I'm like, no. Fuck.
No, it's very interesting because as you describe it, I'm sort of starting to see it in my mind's eye what you're talking about. But I'm trying to like apply these ideas from the light grid into that. Yeah,
it doesn't work. Okay. Don't do that. Okay.
So if for example, if I wanted to start working with you and I said, I have a business and I have coaching clients and I want to be able to find my genius, what is the first step that you would give to a potential client that says, you got to figure it out, Lorna? Just tell me what I need to do. So how do you get people into that genius state?
Well, the first thing I would do is do a genius summoning session. And I do those frequently. They're an hour long. There's a few questions that they have to answer beforehand. And then I am essentially summoning the consciousness of I'm summoning their business consciousness. That is that which is meant to stream their genius and monetize their genius. And in fact, pulling from it's because this is dark, genius is dark. So I'm not pulling from a place where the business consciousness already exists. I'm actually pulling it into existence.
Sure.
And so what I do is, I can just, I don't know. It's like I joke the movie, Sixth Sense, where the little boy says, I see dead people.
Yeah.
I just see genius. I just know it. I've done this my whole life and without knowing it. And so we spend an hour together and I tell them, this is what your genius is. And it's very practical. I've gone through, I cannot tell you how many books and workshops and shit to find my own genius. And I come away with this kind of airy fairy shit that I'm like, but like, this could apply to like 25 different things that I'm actually supposed to do.
Sure.
You're meant to help people actualize their consciousness. Okay. This is like very specific because I actually bring in my marketing background. So I've years and years in marketing. And so I bring that in to bear and we get into the brass tacks of how this because genius is precise in the extreme. It is meant to be delivered through a precise consciousness. So, there's this famous author, the one who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. who said in one of her subsequent books, if you don't channel, or if you don't capture the genius, and the genius that wants to be expressed and express it, it's going to move on to another mind or another person and get itself expressed. That's not true at all. That is not true. Your genius can only be expressed through your blueprint. It cannot be expressed through anybody else's. So we get really, nitty gritty. Who are the people specifically that are blueprinted to receive your genius specifically and nobody else's? What is their specific problem that genius solves? What is the messaging? I mean, because at the end of the day, this is about monetizing their genius. They actually go away with the whole kind of business setup. But it starts at the place where it must start, which is identifying their genius and then using that to inform all the rest of it. And then after that, if they feel, which most do, that they will need some help walking this out into the world, then we put them in one of our containers, whether it's more business focused to help them market and sell, or it's more consciousness focused to help them with the shadow alchemy and their consciousness and their energy mastery and all that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Okay. So do you think that it's possible for people you were saying before that you can only find your genius yourself. How did you find your genius when you did this? And how did you identify, like, that's my genius, I get that, when you were navigating and through the dark grid that you're talking about?
I backed into it.
You backed into it.
Well, I let the dark inform me. I did it backwards because that's how it is.
For sure. Yeah.
So I did it backwards. I didn't know what, I was really bored with the sales coach. I started, my business doing sales coaching.
Sure.
And I reached a level of mastery. So when you were talking about people who are bored because they're like, okay, I've done this before. Like, what they're doing is they're reaching a level of excellence that is, they're meant to go far beyond into their genius. So there's excellence, which is on the light grid. That's those 4 archetypes govern and express your highest level of excellence. But excellence is ultimately empty. And genius is really the only thing that truly fulfills us. Because genius is bespoke and unique to my particular consciousness, which is why I'm not concerned if people parrot, which they do all the time, parrot my language and my concepts. Good luck. I mean, it's just free PR for me. But there's a lot of excellent sales coaches. There's a lot of excellent marketers. There's a lot, excellence is a shared skill that you share with a lot of other people. Genius, you got the IP on that, and so for me, I went through the dark. I went through the initiation into the dark, and then I just kind of did my thing, navigating kind of by taste and being initiated into this new conscious field of consciousness. And that became my genius. In other words, I was doing the thing that I was a genius at before I really realized it. And then when I kind of discovered that and started talking about it, people were like, what in the fuck is this? I need to know more about this. And then that became my brand, and that became, my focus. So, but for other people, one of the other aspects of, because genius is dark, I can see theirs, they may have a trouble seeing it because they're trying to look at it from the light.
Because they're afraid of it, or
genius is terrifying. Genius will eat you alive and spit you out and shred you. And it's terrifying. It's not a human frequency. And it does not care about the human condition. It doesn't care about your comfort. It doesn't care about anything. It's from the dark, right? So it's not in relation to anything that is of the light, which is the human construct, is a light grid construct. So it's like living, I say, living with your genius is like living with a dragon. It's an uneasy relationship, but one that, if you know how to become the dragon, is like nothing else. So, and that's really what we're doing. We're changing. The dark is bringing in a shift at a species level. The human, as we know it, will not be that which inhabits the waking dream reality. It will be something else entirely.
So sort of like a transpersonal kind of, it's like, this definitely doesn't feel like Dawn. This definitely doesn't feel like Lorna. It's kind of operating its own intelligence through the physical vessel.
Exactly. And the shapeshifter codes are coming along with that, right? So,
So you're gonna turn into you could turn into a box.
Right. So who am I? All these questions that we ask, who am I? Why am I here? What am I meant to do? All of these very important questions that fuel every hero's journey, every hero, every fucking movie, book, story, essentially at heart, those are the questions that are being asked. As if there is a consistent self that has a right and a reason to ask them, which right now it does, right? But that's the whole concept of identity, and a consistent identity, which we place so much value on here on Earth for obvious reasons, is also going away, because that's just a construct that allowed us to kind of function and survive and master the 3D world. But the shapeshifter codes are really the ones that are bringing in the new human to inhabit the new Earth.
Interesting. Okay, so when you made your sale for $1 million in the first year, what were some results that you saw from some of your clients after they worked with you? Were there some big testimonials that you've seen from people like, oh my gosh, I've had this massive awakening? Can you describe a little of some of those examples?
It was totally unexpected and actual real miracles. So mine, I did $1 million in sales. So, that was over 10 months. I did $1 million in sales. And I think that, money wise, I took people from, $5,000 months to $100,000 months in 30 days. Regularly. I mean, those kinds of leaps were par for the course. People just blew their numbers out, which then blew their psyches out, because that kind of leap is unimaginable and terrifying to the psyche. So I had a lot of those. I had a lot of, I had one woman who had been doing $1,500 months for, I don't know, like a year. And she had a $50,000 weekend within the first, I think, month we were working together. So radical, kind of crazy upgrades in their revenue and in their business, but then all kinds of physical miracles. I mean, one woman cured. She had a really bad rash on her arms or hands for 40 years, and she tried everything out there you can possibly try to cure it. And within 3 weeks of working with me, it was gone. I've had people cure lifelong addictions to alcohol, cigarettes, sugar, in a matter of weeks working with me. I had somebody cure, she had been suffering from hair loss for 16 years. And in 1 hour, it was gone. It was done.
Wow.
She started growing her hair back. So lots of stories. People have gotten pregnant after being told there's no way you can get pregnant and you won't ever get pregnant. And they tried forever, never, never, and all the things. And within, a month of working with me, they were pregnant. So, I mean, it's been interesting because I never expected any of that stuff. I was a sales coach. So I was like, the numbers I get, but all this other stuff, but it makes perfect sense, right? Because energy is energy is energy.
Sure.
And if you're running shadow, it's going to show up in some part of we all know this, right? If you're sick, look at your shadow, look at your psyche, look at the health of your psyche. So obviously, because I don't teach sales skills, I mean, I do, but I don't do sales, teaching or coaching the way anybody else does it. I teach the energetics of sales. I teach the metaphysics, like you were saying, metaphysician extraordinaire. Everything I do is I teach the fundamentals. I teach the root, the source codes. And so what it does is it upgrades. It actually is an upgrade to their consciousness. They think they're learning sales, but it's actually a complete upgrade to their consciousness. And so it's inevitable that the other areas of their life that are expressing shadow simply have no option but to now express light, because they're upgrading their whole consciousness from shadow to light through this process of shadow alchemy. Yeah.
Can you describe to me a little more about what you mean by shadow codes?
Yeah.
Like, is that like a, can you describe a little more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you look at the light grid, the light grid is comprised of, just like this wooden desk is comprised of cells, right? The light grid is comprised of codes that actually are the structure of the light grid. Like if you look at the light grid elementally, it's made up of codes. And there are shadow codes and light codes. Shadow codes are just distorted light. It's like a cell that's withered, and is kind of dying, right? But its proper state is to be a light code. So that's what I mean. I don't know if that answers your question, but when the psyche becomes confronted with the immense power that it actually has access to as light, which happens to almost every human when they're a little person on the planet, and grows up in all kinds of different conditions where they're told they're not powerful, or they shouldn't be powerful, or they shouldn't know what they know, or they have no evidence to know what they know. I mean, all the things that we go through as kids, that develop in us a fear of our own power. And culturally also condition us out of a comfort and an access to that power, because in fact, it's not been conducive to human survival for everyone to be godlike, doesn't work. And so when the psyche confronts an aspect of its power, light is power. Okay, those are just kind of synonymous terms. An aspect of its power that it deems as dangerous because of its survival in the tribe or in the family or what have you, it actually conducts an energetic distortion on that code that dims it down, right? That's why we say dimming your light. And causes it to operate at a very minimal level. It's kind of like when you turn your lights way down, it essentially turns the dial down on those codes that it considers dangerous. So for instance, if you're a child and you've lived in a really super like mine, super logical, super head intellectual, kind of family, intuition, we don't talk about intuition. Intuition is silly. It's ridiculous. It's dumb. You're dumb if you think that even exists, or you would expect that you could live a meaningful life according to your intuition. It's logic. It's intellect. It's right. And so those codes those codes that reside in the magician, which is the ultimate intuitor, and psychic, those get distorted, and so they operate in a very suboptimal place, which is the place of the saboteur, and it causes us to be in total illusion about what we know and how we know it, and what's important to know when, and whether we can depend on something we kind of sense but don't know with our brains, right? We were just talking about that. So that's a practical example of how a light code becomes distorted into a shadow code. And depending on what channel, right? So the magician saboteur, as you can probably sense, is a lot about the mind and about knowing. Mm-hmm. So if there's enough shadow distortion, you're going to have mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. That's what you're going to have. That's how it's going to express itself, which is exactly what happened with me. If you have shadow codes in the other pillar is the warrior, which is the light version, and the victim, mm-hmm. which is the shadow version. If you have a lot of distorted codes because maybe you were beat when you were a kid, right? You were in a war zone. And so you learned, you experienced life as a victim, and you learned to cower in the presence of power, and you learned to not use your physical power that you were endowed with, or to be resourceful and use access to resources, because the warrior is also very resourceful. So if you learned to distort your shadow codes around the power of the warrior energy, you're very likely going to have physical illnesses that manifest in your body, or problems with possessions and things getting stolen all the time, and or being homeless, things like that. Mm. So as those clients came to me, and we essentially converted those shadow codes back into light, not only did the money thing shift, but obviously the other stuff that they had no idea was related at all to any of it.
Sure.
Shifted very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So that's where you feel like the real click happened, when you're working with your clients. Do you feel like there was like a specific thing that you said or a specific thing you did where like the light bulb went off in their head? They're like, oh my God, I get it. Or do you think it was more like a step-by-step process that you've taken through your clients?
It depends on the container, I guess. So we have a container, a shadow alchemy container, that's pretty step-by-step, because it really teaches the tool, and it teaches people how to apply the tool. So there's kind of some structure there. The
tool that's not a tool.
The untool. Yeah.
The untool. Yeah. Here's the tool, but it's not a tool.
Right. Yes. Good luck using it. It's an untool. Yeah. But in my work, as you can probably guess, I don't follow a structure. I don't follow a process. No. But it never comes from something I say. It comes from something I tell them they have to do. And once they do, for instance, I just had a woman, I told her she had to have a very specific conversation with her husband, because her stuff was a lot about the feminine and masculine. Her relationship to her husband was the expression of her relationship to the masculine. Mm-hmm. And she was having challenges with money, and men and money are the same. I mean, they're the same frequency. And so I really didn't work with her on her business stuff. I worked with her on her relationship to her husband, because if you want to really actualize a powerful relationship to the masculine, you cannot do it in the energetic theoretical world. You actually have to do it with an actual man. Sure. So I gave her a very specific conversation to have. Within 24 hours, she was invited to a podcast with, I think it was over 1 million viewership a month. She signed her highest consulting client, and one of the other things that happened very soon around that time was she signed her first 100K pay in full client. And it was directly traced back to this very specific conversation that she had with her husband. So the concepts in the coaching call, or in between the coaching calls, like that's very important. It's kind of seeding and reprogramming the consciousness, but action, and this is where people really resist the work very much. It's the biggest place they resist it because the action that I require them to take, in order to live out the principles, the true spiritual laws that are governed by those 4 archetypes, we're talking light laws now, require certain actions. I mean, you can't live in discordance with the truth. And once you know the truth, you have to go and fucking do some things differently in the actual world. And that is terrifying, but people have crazy fucking, I mean, it's always connected to one of those specific actions that they took as a result of the guidance. And then the awarenesses and the theoretical concepts that I'm teaching them help anchor it for them so that they can then take it out and know what kind of alchemical actions they need to take next.
Interesting. Yeah. One of my mentors told me a really profound quote that I like a lot. It says, "To know and not to do is not to know."
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's really within the doing. Yeah.
It is. So action is the best alchemy.
Sure. Yeah. So that's sort of.
I don't teach meditation. No, go ahead.
Yeah, that sort of ties in with what the whole purpose of this whole summit series is about, like finding and fulfilling your life's purpose. And I feel like the spiritual community is very much in their heads. They're very much stuck in the theoretical, the escaping the physical reality. But the real rubber meets the road is when you actually go do something, and that's when the transformation happens.
Yep.
It's the anchoring in the genius. Yeah,
absolutely, because that's where the shadow is the strongest. Shadow is meant to not actualize power. That's the whole point of it, right? I mean, that's what we were talking about earlier. Power is light, and so shadow's whole purpose is to keep you from actualizing your power. And so one of the ways, actually, and it's the saboteur that does this. One of the ways shadow keeps you from doing that is to convince you that you don't need to. The realization is enough, right? The peak, the peak moment on the mountain is enough. Going to another workshop is enough. Reading another book is enough. Attending another summit is enough. It's not enough. And that's why, astonishingly, the personal development industry is like a $10 billion industry and growing. And severe anxiety and suicide is also growing. And they're correlated, right? There isn't necessarily a causal relation, but I will tell you, I became more and more depressed and more suicidal the more spiritual work I did, because I wasn't actually doing any actual work. It was all in my head, and none of my coaches or mentors required me to get out of my head and actually, do the very specific thing that would shift everything. And so it's kind of an epidemic I see in the spiritual community that, they're so enamored with their rituals and their practices, which they might think is doing something, but it's not doing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about hard conversations, hard decisions, that impact relationships and businesses and income, and living situations and, reputation. I'm talking hard stuff.
So it's like basically doing the thing you fear the most.
Basically.
Yeah, basically.
But the thing is that a lot of people have become so afraid that they're numb and they don't know they're afraid anymore. They have no idea that they're afraid of that. In fact, when I say it, sometimes they're like, okay, and I'm like, oh, you're in for a rude awakening if you actually do what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Or they're like, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, I don't really need to do that. I mean, that's, I don't know, you know, which is all their saboteur trying to argue with me.
Sure. Fascinating. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It really feels like another great quote that I like, that I always fall back on, is do the right thing long enough consistently. And it feels like whenever I really like that a lot. It's like whenever you are doing the thing that scares you the most, you sort of, I find, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh yeah, this again, like I'm going to do this. Or like, oh yeah, that felt really uncomfortable, but now it's sort of normal to me. But then there's
the problem though, is what's the right thing. And and when I was a student in this world, and I've been a student in this world for 15, 20 years, I've spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on some of the best kind of spiritual guides and coaches and intuitives and all of that stuff. And yet, and I was trying to follow my intuition. I mean, I knew by this time, I was like, okay, intuition is like really actually very important, and I need to listen to it all the time. But I didn't know how to recognize the voice of my intuition. I was fooled a lot of times that my saboteur sounds like your intuition. It can masquerade. It's the shapeshifter.
I would really like to explore this, if you can tell me how it sounds different, because this sounds
well, so a lot of times, so this is the easiest one, I think. You know, I'd be on a call with a prospect and invite them to work with me, for instance, and they would say, you know, I'm checking in with my body, and I'm really feeling a no. And I would say, who the fuck cares what your body thinks? If you go up in an airplane, your body's going to be fucking terrified. It's irrational to be terrified in an airplane. When you go in a car, is your body terrified? No, that's very irrational. Your body should be terrified when you get in a car and not terrified when you get in an airplane, just statistically. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Sense. And so they're like, right. I said, what I'm asking you to do right now is get into an airplane. And you're fucking terrified. And so your body is resisting because it thinks it has the navigational system for where your next quantum leap is. It doesn't have the navigational system. It's navigating by what it knows. And it doesn't know flight. It's a ground being. Like your body is not always, sometimes it is, but it's not always. Just because it's afraid and just because it's constricting and everything's fucking seizing up does not mean it's a no. It just means you're fucking terrified. You see, and a lot of light workers kind of, almost, deify their bodies and won't do anything unless their body says it's a yes. Well, that's going to keep you playing very small and in a familiar sandbox. Because the biggest leaps anybody has ever made are absolutely fucking terrifying. And the systems built to help us survive, which is what our body was built to do, are not equipped to tell us how to thrive. In most cases, not in all cases. There are times when the body is accurate, and it's a full body yes, and I'm actually supposed to fucking do that. Or it's a full body no, and I'm not supposed to do that. But it's not because the body said so. It's because you have a discernment mechanism that really actually can tune into the shadow that's operating the body in fear, right? If the body is operating out of shadow, it's going to fear that which it is actually meant to embrace. And I found that a lot of people in this world don't know that. They can't discern the difference. That's just that's just one kind of one example.
Sure. So what's the word I'm looking for? The discernment you're looking for is not found in. Okay, how do I say this? So when you talk to a lot of people, they say, "I don't feel right in my body. This doesn't feel right."
One of the things they say.
One of the things.
Yeah.
So how does the right decision feel to you differently than to you? Like how does it manifest to you?
Yeah.
Because it seems to be working for you.
Well, I don't feel into it.
Okay.
That's not how I do it. Because I know that I know that if I'm feeling into it, I'll get all kinds of different signals.
Sure.
So I just don't do that. I know this is going to be infuriatingly obtuse, but I really do navigate by taste because my world is the dark world now. I navigate by taste, and if I have a taste for it, I'm fucking doing it.
Mm-hmm. So when you say taste, it's like that feels like I'd want to do that. Like, yeah, that feels.
It's not. It's really. It's more. It's not so much a feeling as it is a draw, kind of this kind of unmistakable draw. There's a seductiveness to it, which is why the dark is also very terrifying for people.
So it almost, for lack of better words, feels like almost like hedonistic in a way. Kind of like I like that, and you know, I want to take that.
I just fucking have a taste for it. I just have a taste for it, and I'm doing it, and I'm not going to concern myself with whether that taste is poison or not. I'll find out, and then I'll alchemize the poison out of my system, and I will be a strong motherfucker for the next poison that comes along.
Interesting.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, in a way, it's sort of like taking what you want because in that whim it feels right, and then you find out if it was actually beneficial to you in the future, and
you make it beneficial. I mean, that's one of the things
beneficial to you.
That's one of the things that's so cool about the dark is that there's the alchemy that is possible it has no bounds, right? Because it's the Erasio grid. So you can actually convert poison into potion in the moment. And it's not based on whether it was a good move or a bad move or what have you. It's really kind of your own, your own will, your own abilities. But it's not so much a whim, and it's not kind of like, oh, I just kind of want to do this. There's a precision to it. And there is a submission to this way of navigating that takes a lot of mastery. And you may not have meant it that way, but I want listeners to be able to discern between this kind of crazy hedonistic, very shadowy way of operating, which is I just kind of like feel like doing it. I just have a taste for that.
Yeah.
And this
does it sort of feel like an impulse? Like I want that bar of chocolate.
It feels like a draw. It's gravitational. So the field is gravitational. It's not magnetic. So the light grid is electromagnetic and the dark is gravitational. It is an unmistakable draw. There's just it's like, which is what's scary for people. It kind of feels like the sirens probably the sirens felt to Odysseus,
Like as you're talking about it, like, and I'm picking up what you're saying, like in my mind, it kind of feels like, oh, that's like the no zone.
Yep.
Like I shouldn't do that. Like that's sort of like, like that's naughty or, whatever. Like you can't, but what you're suggesting is if it feels like naughty or bad or, whatever it is, that's where the genius is.
It could very well be. It also could be shadow, which is why it's important to work, to work with somebody like me on this discernment, because it could totally be shadow. It could be your saboteur, right? It could be your saboteur being like, hey, let's go, like Pinocchio, let's go over here. There's this really cool island over here, like hedonistic and crazy and terrible, right? So but they feel so different to me. I mean, shadow and dark, they have such a different feel. Dark is pristine and really clean and clear. And shadow is super dense, and heavy. And so when someone is speaking, I know which is which. And then they can start to discern over time which is which, and then shift their navigation system to, from light to dark. But, there's a gray area where a lot of times they're like, what am I actually, but like, what is going on? But if they stick with it, it's like what you said, do the right thing for long enough.
Consistently.
Consistently.
Do the right thing long enough consistently.
Yeah. Do the right thing long enough consistently. If they're able to hold the tension of this radical new way of navigating, the results are profound.
Okay. Awesome. Wow. This is a really interesting and insightful conversation. Definitely was not expecting this approach. It's fantastic. It's very unique. So I think I'm going to wrap it up with one more conversation for you. If you can just kind of summarize it all in one thing, is there a message that you would like to communicate about finding and fulfilling one's life purpose in like a very succinct statement? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I could say it in all kinds of, trite ways. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Follow your intuition, is true, but it feels trite. I would say take the terrifying action. Take the action you are fucking terrified of. The one that's been whispering to you for days, months, probably years, that you keep brushing off because it makes no sense and it's going to ruin everything. And because you can't possibly see how everything will work out if you do, take the terrifying action, and then take the next terrifying action, and then take the next terrifying action. That's what I would say. Okay. Your true purpose and calling lies in the direction of the most consistently terrifying actions you can imagine. There. How's that?
That's awesome. Yeah. That's like when you get used to being terrified, you're like, oh yeah. Okay.
It's still terrifying, but you've done it enough times that you're like, okay, it's just another jump out of the plane, even though I'm fucking terrified.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like the expression, God loves it when you take the leap of faith.
Yep.
And it's just like, all right, you're going to figure it out along the way.
It's always a leap. My fiance took me hiking yesterday. And we found this kind of watering holes, the deep, cold water kind of pond, whatever it was called. And a huge boulder, I mean, probably like 8 feet, 9 feet tall, that you had to kind of precariously climb up. It's like even the getting up the boulder was like, I hope I don't fall and break my leg. Yeah. And he gets up there and he does a backflip off of it, into the water. And I'm like, my decision that day was, do I go into the water or not? And he was like, your turn. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's no, but I did. And then I did it again. And it was just as terrifying the second time. And I was like, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to get easier? And then I was kind of like, no, of course. I mean, it's just as terrifying, but it's worth it. Yeah. It's worth it. Yeah. That reminds me very much of like going to martial arts. Like I train martial arts, and the word dojo means the way of life. And so it's interesting when you go in there, because that you're going to get hit, and you're probably going to get hit pretty hard. Maybe, especially if you're fighting with people that are a lot better than you. Yeah. But that when you consistently do that over and over and over again,
you're just going to get used to that, and you're going to figure out how it works, and you're not going to get hit as much or not get hit as hard, or figure out a way to deal with it in a way. So it sort of feels like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. Willingly go get hit.
Right here. Other side. It's getting lonely.
Right.
Yeah. It builds character.
I like that.
Getting punched in the face builds character. It does.
Yeah.
It's some sick.
I mean, that's the thing.
Way, but it does.
I talk about being, I talk about being in the arena. And most people are just fucking bystanders. They're standing inside the arena, but their backs up against the wall, and they think, no, I'm in the arena. No, you're not. No, you're not. You don't have a sword, and you're not bloody. So, no.
Totally.
So anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lorna. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Me too.
Fantastic.